The warmth from the heater still lingered, blowing against the glass door as Emily Vargas vanished in Rainier Valley, Seattle, a neighborhood home to more than 70,000 residents. October 2008. Arrived with intermittent drizzle, stretching across South Seattle, turning sidewalks into patches of water that reflected the blurred glow of streetlights. At 8:41 p.m., a convenience store clerk caught a glimpse of Emily, the 17-year-old teenager, stepping out into the parking lot with a bottle of water still beaded with cold condensation on her hand. She was returning a pair of silver blue headphones that Maya had borrowed earlier that evening, the same pair the three of them often shared when walking from Capitol Hill downtown. An elderly regular waiting for the bus watched Emily's figure gradually fade into the thin curtain of rain, her gray hoodie the last bright streak amid the band of golden light spilling from the neon sign. What happened in the next 12 minutes would haunt Rainier Valley for the following 14 years. Before diving deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. October 2008 saw Rainier Valley shrouded in thick, gray sheets of rain, streetlights casting streaky reflections across the cold, wet asphalt. The normally quiet southern Seattle area felt even heavier at night as temperatures dropped sharply and wind carried dampness from Lake Washington up the slopes around Rainier Avenue S. Against that harsh weather backdrop, the three of them, Emily Vargas, 17, Maya Vargas, 18, and Dylan Brooks, 19, drove an old sedan from Capitol Hill back home after spending the afternoon helping Dylan clean his new place. They were tired, but still pushed to finish the trip, planning only a quick stop at the 7-Eleven on Rainier Avenue S for a few items before continuing. Around 9:40 p.m., the car pulled up in front of the store, white light from the sign reflecting off the fine rain coating the vehicle. Emily got out first and went inside while Maya and Dylan fumbled in the back seat checking their belongings. The intersection was deserted except for a few cars speeding past and the sound of rain lashing the metal awning. A few minutes later, Emily stepped out of the store holding a small bag and headed straight toward the parking lot. The store's security camera, an old system with limited coverage, captured her figure just as she left the entrance, but only for a few seconds before she was obscured by a dark patch caused by the rain and the camera's narrow angle, not covering the entire lot. That was the last time any device recorded an image of Emily. Maya and Dylan came out shortly afterward and could no longer see her anywhere in the parking lot. The two spread out to search the immediate area around the store, from the trash bins to the edges of the lot, then circled to the side where a narrow alley ran, but found no sign that Emily had passed through. They tried calling, but Emily's phone neither rang nor accepted texts. The rain grew heavier, making the search more difficult. Each passing minute only heightened their unease. Over the next nearly 2 hours, Maya and Dylan repeatedly returned to the lot, asked passers-by, and drove along stretches of Rainier Avenue said, but gathered no leads whatsoever. By the time the clock passed 11 p.m., with still no response from Emily, the prolonged silence could no longer be explained by ordinary delay or a minor misunderstanding. After hearing Maya and Dylan recount the final minutes at the convenience store in Rainier Valley, the Vargas family realized that Emily's disappearance in mere dozens of seconds could not be taken lightly, and they decided without hesitation they had to call the police that very night. The Seattle Police Department received the missing person call at 11:12 p.m. and immediately classified the case under the Missing Juvenile Protocol in effect in 2008. The file was logged as Missing Person Juvenile Case #087412, officially placing Emily Vargas in the priority response category. Within minutes of the report being entered, dispatch forwarded the details to the patrol unit covering Rainier Valley and requested verification of any immediately checkable information that night. Initially, SPD contacted the family to confirm key details. Emily had no luggage, wallet, Idaho, or personal items with her beyond the phone. That was now unreachable. She had given no prior indication of plans to stay out. She had no history of running away. Hospitals from Beacon Hill to South Lake Union were called to check for unidentified accident victims or emergency admissions, but all reported no matches to her description. SPD also checked the nearest bus stops and routes passing Rainier Avenue Ceph between 9:45 p.m. and 11 p.m. But no reports indicated a lone teenager or anyone exhibiting unusual behavior. The Transit Authority confirmed no camera footage showed a matching passenger in the 3 hours since Emily was last seen. Next, police explored whether Emily might have left the area by personal vehicle or late-night ferry, but both possibilities were ruled out. She did not drive, and ferry schedules from Seattle to Bainbridge Island or Bremerton during that window showed no unaccompanied young passengers. When patrol officers arrived at the Vargas home around midnight, 2 officers conducted initial interviews with Maya and Dylan right in the living room. Both were asked to recount the full sequence of events from leaving Capitol Hill to discovering Emily missing, but since this was only a preliminary step, police did not yet probe for inconsistencies or verify accuracy in detail. Key recorded information included no major arguments in the group. Before stopping at 7-Eleven, Emily's departure time matched the camera. The disappearance occurred in under 2 minutes. Phone contact was lost immediately afterward. The night shift officer assessed no signs, suggesting Emily intentionally left Seattle, and no data supported any plan to disappear. Behavioral traits, habits, and personal history provided by the family all reinforced that this disappearance was anomalous and contrary to her established patterns. After completing the full chain of basic overnight checks from residents, hospitals, close friends to bus routes, ferries, and emergency facilities, SPD concluded that continuing to wait through the late hours would yield no valuable new data. The case factors fully met criteria for organized field search rather than mere administrative verification. This decision was officially logged at 12:47 a.m. with the order, "Initiate field search." Priority 2, marking the transition of Emily Vargas's disappearance from initial intake to active on-scene response, with the starting point set as the 7-Eleven parking lot on Rainier Avenue S, where she was last seen. As Seattle skies began to lighten around 6:10 a.m. the next morning, the Seattle Police Department deployed a Level 1 search team in the area surrounding the 7-Eleven on Rainier Avenue S, per the plan approved overnight. The search radius was set to standard for missing juvenile cases, approximately 300 meters from the last camera-captured position of Emily before she left view. This zone included a tangled network of side streets, intersecting slopes, parking lots interspersed with residences, and narrow walkways behind rows of shops. The search team was divided into 3 groups. The first responsible for sweeping the parking lot and 7-Eleven storefront area, the second checking pedestrian paths parallel to Rainier Avenue S, the third entering the residential area behind the store, which contained numerous small alleys connecting to Beacon Avenue S. K-9 units were deployed from the start, using an item still carrying Emily's scent taken from the family car. The tracking dog started at the 7-Eleven exit, headed toward the parking lot, but lost the scent completely after just over 20 meters due to the previous night's rain having heavily diluted the trail. The K-9 team attempted 2 different routes with the same result, forcing them to note that weather conditions made scent tracking nearly impossible. In the neighboring residential area, officers knocked on doors within the search radius to ask if anyone had heard or seen anything unusual between 9:45 p.m. and 10 p.m. the previous night. Most residents reported heavy rain at the time, few people out, and no sounds of shouting, arguing, or scuffling. A few mentioned seeing car headlights flash on and off quickly on the slope beside the store, but no one could confirm a license plate or direction of travel. Behind the store, searchers found numerous public trash bins and access paths to nearby apartment parking, but no evidence such as clothing, bags, a phone, or anything potentially belonging to Emily. 2 security cameras, one at a phone repair shop and one at a car wash, were checked in person, but neither covered positions Emily might have passed. The field team also examined mud, concrete, and soft soil along curbs for skid marks, footprints, or drag marks, but found no indication of struggle or resistance. All data from the initial search led to the same conclusion: the area around the 7-Eleven left no visible trace that rainy night. When the sweep ended around 9 a.m., the summary report highlighted 3 key points. No direct physical evidence linked to Emily was recovered. No witnesses confirmed seeing her after the final camera moment, and no signs of violence, accident, or forced movement were detected. With the scene yielding no further data, SPD determined that the Level 1 search radius had reached the limit of effectiveness and could not continue producing results without expanding the approach. The decision to expand was officially logged at 9:27 a.m. with the directive: expand search radius, Level 2 required, while shifting focus from pure search to re-solidifying the timeline of events before and after Emily's disappearance. That same morning, alongside the plan for expanded field search, the Seattle Police Department's investigative unit began collecting all available visual material around the 7-Eleven to more accurately reconstruct the sequence of events. However, the technological context of 2008 imposed significant limitations. Most cameras in Rainier Valley were low-resolution analog systems, recording only 10-12 frames per second, with poor low-light performance and narrow fields of view. Still, any footage was critical, as many prior missing persons cases had been solved with just a few seconds of grainy video. SPD's technical team retrieved original DVR tapes from the 7-Eleven camera, along with footage from the phone repair shop, car wash, and internal parking lot camera, and 2 building-mounted cameras across the street, all within 400 meters. Collection occurred from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. to prevent overwriting, as many systems at the time retained footage for only 48 to 72 hours. Upon bringing all data to the lab, investigators immediately noted lower than expected image quality. Many cameras showed rain-induced noise. Dark areas were nearly blacked out. Facial features and license plates were unrecognizable. Nevertheless, the first task was to rebuild the timeline from whatever was visible. From the in-store camera, Emily entered at 21 hours, 42 minutes, and 17 seconds, and exited at 21 hours, 45 minutes, and 3 seconds, matching the printed receipt time at checkout. The exterior camera clearly captured the moment she opened the door and stepped out, bag in hand, turning right toward the parking lot. However, just 4 seconds later, her image disappeared from frame because the camera angle did not cover the eastern section of the lot. This created a blind spot lasting roughly 90 to 120 seconds, the complete absence of any figure corresponding to the path Emily would need to take to return to the group's car. SPD identified this as the critical window. If anything happened, it almost certainly occurred in that uncovered area. As other cameras were reviewed sequentially, investigators found that the apartment complex parking lot camera captured motion at the edge of frame around 21:46, but the image was rain-blurred, showing only a dark mass moving quickly left to right. Technicians could not determine whether it was a pedestrian, tree shadow, or vehicle reflection. Continuing chronologically, the phone repair shop camera showed the front lot empty from 21:40 to 21:50, except for a fleeting figure appearing at 21 hours 46 minutes and 12 seconds at the frame's edge. The figure stood under the awning, tall, apparently wearing a dark coat. It did not approach the store, but remained visible for nearly 3 seconds before vanishing behind a pillar. Though blurry and lacking detail, SPD had to note this as a noteworthy appearance due to its near-perfect timing with Emily's blind spot. Cross-referencing a second camera from the apartment building at the corner, investigators recorded a similar figure in the same time frame, a shape moving in the alley to the left of the 7-Eleven, at moderate speed consistent with walking. The only standout feature was relative height and arm movement, suggesting the person might be holding something, but video quality was insufficient to identify whether it was a bag, phone, or other item. Reconstructing the timeline by syncing system clocks from multiple cameras proved complex due to analog clock drift of up to tens of seconds. SPD used the 7-Eleven receipt time, considered the most accurate reference, then adjusted offsets for each system. Through analysis, SPD established the following standardized timeline: 21:42, 21:45. Emily inside the store, 21 hours 45 minutes and 3 seconds. Emily exits, 21 hours 45 minutes and 8 seconds. Emily disappears from view, 21 hours 46 minutes and 12 seconds. Unknown figure appears on phone repair shop camera, 21 hours 46 minutes and 18 seconds. 21 hours 46 minutes and 24 seconds. Blurry motion in left alley, 21:47, 21:48. No further motion matching Emily or her companions. In an internal report at 3:30 p.m., SPD noted that no camera captured Emily leaving the area or entering another vehicle. No footage showed struggle, argument, or fleeing behavior. However, the appearance of an unidentified man during the sensitive timeframe led police to flag it as a detail to track in the baseline report. Though the images were blurry and unusable for identification, SPD listed it under unknown male, potential relevance, as his role could not be ruled out. By the end of the workday, the investigative team reached a unified conclusion from all collected baseline camera data. The pre- and post-disappearance timeline was established, but the pivotal moment lay entirely outside any device's coverage. The unknown man's appearance near the store remained unexplained by visual data, and existing footage provided no direct clue to Emily's direction after leaving frame. Given those limitations, SPD determined that further camera analysis at this stage would yield no breakthrough, and the investigation had to shift focus to human sources to fill the gaps images could not capture. Immediately after finalizing camera data standardization, the Seattle Police Department proceeded to the next step, taking statements from individuals present in the area during the window of Emily's disappearance to supplement the blurry, interrupted footage already obtained. The night shift clerk at 7-Eleven was interviewed first. He confirmed Emily entered to buy items in a normal state, with no argument or signs of anxiety or haste. He also noted the store was quite empty that night, due to heavy rain reducing customer traffic, and between 9:40 p.m. and 10 p.m., only 3 people came in: Emily, a middle-aged male customer, and a man in a baseball cap who bought nothing, and merely stood at the entrance for a few dozen seconds. When asked, the clerk described the man as taller than average, dark coat, posture, leaning slightly forward, but said he observed only from the counter and the moment passed too quickly to confirm facial features or other specifics. Police next interviewed 2 transient customers who appeared near the time Emily left, gathering a few scattered details. A woman who parked nearby said she saw a man standing close to the awning, hands in pockets, like he was waiting for someone or sheltering from rain, which roughly matched the figure on the phone repair shop camera. Another man walking across the street at 9:45 p.m. recalled seeing a tall figure right against the glass door, but hurrying to cross before the light changed, did not look closely and could not confirm any interaction with Emily. None of the witnesses heard cries for help, arguing, or signs of struggle, and none saw Emily leave in any specific direction. However, the fact that multiple people recalled a man in a cap or dark coat standing near the entrance, precisely during the camera blind spot, prompted SPD to record this as the first notable convergence of information since the disappearance began. When questioned further, Maya and Dylan, still in shock after the fruitless night search, also recalled that as they stepped out of the store, they noticed someone standing slightly to the right of the door, but focused on finding Emily, they did not pay close attention. Dylan said he briefly saw someone turn their face away as they approached, while Maya vaguely recalled a sense that Emily might have stepped under the awning near that man for a few seconds to avoid the rain. Neither confirmed any conversation between Emily and the man, but they mentioned the possibility of a brief interaction when investigators asked about anything unusual they might have overlooked. These details led SPD to form a fairly clear initial hypothesis, although no physical evidence existed yet. The convergence of a man appearing exactly when Emily left camera view, described consistently by multiple witnesses in position and timing, made him a person of interest requiring clarification. In the baseline report, investigators noted that the persistent presence of the unknown man during the same time frame, location, and camera blind area was sufficient to establish a preliminary suspect direction. In a context with no signs of Emily leaving Seattle, no means for her to travel far independently, and no scene evidence, the presence of an unidentified adult male right at the exit, where the camera gap occurred, became the most prominent detail. When compiling all statements from the day, SPD concluded that the most viable investigative direction in the early stage must center on the man who appeared near the store during Emily's disappearance window, while expanding checks for any unrecorded witnesses who may have passed through the area that rainy night. With no physical evidence and no direct visual data, the inexplicable presence of this man became the sole anchor point for continuing the investigation. From that moment onward, the unknown man was officially designated the first person of interest in the Emily Vargas missing person file. Parallel to maintaining this line of inquiry, the Seattle Police Department also launched a separate investigative branch to re-examine the entire context leading up to Emily's disappearance, ensuring no critical details from the preceding hours were overlooked. Investigators shifted to reconstructing the group's travel route, starting by cross-referencing Maya and Dylan's statements with traffic camera data along the path from Capitol Hill down to Rainier Avenue S. According to their accounts, the group left Dylan's apartment near Broadway E around 9:20 p.m. after finishing moving items and taking a short break. The distance from Dylan's apartment to Rainier Valley is approximately 6.5 kilometers, typically taking 12–15 minutes depending on the time and traffic conditions. On a rainy October night, that time frame aligned perfectly with the group appearing at the 7-Eleven parking lot at 9:40 p.m. SPD checked the traffic camera at the Broadway and E Pine intersection, but could not obtain clear footage due to the narrow camera angle and heavy rain. However, the camera at Martin Luther King Jr. Way E captured a sedan matching the color of Maya's vehicle passing through at 9:31 p.m. Consistent with the route they described. All the time data points pieced together indicated the group did not stop en route, did not detour onto side streets, and did not interact with anyone before reaching the store. At the scene, the investigative team continued a more meticulous analysis of the timestamps in the store's cameras. Emily entered at 9 hours 42 minutes and 17 seconds, paid at 9 hours 44 minutes and 55 seconds, and exited the store at 9 hours 45 minutes and 3 seconds. The duration she spent inside matched the time shown on the receipt, meaning no unusual events occurred during that period. When cross-checked against Maya and Dylan's statements, SPD determined the group separated for only about 1 to 2 minutes. The two stayed behind Emily because they were double-checking items in the car. This meant Emily had a very narrow window, no more than 90–120 seconds, in which she moved out of camera view and disappeared completely. To understand what could have happened in that brief time frame, SPD created a site diagram and assessed risk positions just outside the camera angles. Based on the scene map, Emily could have headed in 4 main directions. First, back toward where the group's car was parked on the east side of the lot, but lost to view immediately after crossing the edge of the parking area. Second, turning into the concrete base area, leading to a small alley behind the store. Third, walking along the south wall where there was narrow overhang but poor lighting, or fourth, turning into the opening between 2 rows of shops leading to the residential area behind. None of these 4 directions was directly observed by any camera. Notably, 3 of them, the northeast corner of the parking lot, the rear alley, and the dark gap between the shop rows, were assessed as potential blind zones, where another person could approach without creating noticeable sound or visible signs. When remodeling the movement, investigators considered two main groups of hypotheses based on the time frame and possible directions. Hypothesis 1. Emily left the area voluntarily. She might have, for some reason, walked toward the rear alley, followed the short slope connecting to the residential area off Rainier Avenue S, or turned into the opening to find shelter from the rain. However, SPD assessed this hypothesis as weak because there were no fresh footprints, skid marks, or new mud on the paths. No dropped items, and most importantly, no nearby cameras captured any figure matching Emily's description within 3 hours after the time of disappearance. Additionally, Emily had no history of wandering off on her own or walking alone at night, especially in such heavy rain. Hypothesis 2. Emily was approached or led away in a very short window. Based on camera information and witness statements, the appearance of the unknown man directly under the overhang at the moment Emily exited the store became the central focus. If the man was positioned exactly in the camera blind spot, and Emily walked into that area, they could have made direct contact in just seconds. SPD also considered the possibility that the man was simply standing there to avoid the rain. But his appearance in multiple other cameras, even if only as a blur, made interaction with Emily impossible to rule out. Investigators also analyzed approach paths a stranger could exploit. For example, the alley behind the store was secluded enough for two people to be out of sight for several minutes. The adjacent parking lot often had vehicles parked for long periods, creating exploitable dark pockets. Or the man's vehicle could have been parked outside camera range, requiring only a few steps to leave the scene. After comparing the two hypotheses, SPD temporarily assessed the being led away or approached direction as carrying more weight. Not because of direct evidence, but because the entire pattern of Emily's movements that night provided no motive or behavior suggesting she left on her own. In investigative notes, police emphasized the extremely short time frame. The disappearance occurred in under 2 minutes, long enough for an approach to take place, but too short for a teenager to decide to leave the group without being seen. The route reconstruction continued to reinforce the conclusion that the pivotal event occurred when Emily stepped out of the store and entered a camera blind spot. All subsequent investigative directions had to be based on the hypothesis that she left the area against her own volition. Immediately after completing the route reconstruction and clearly identifying the camera blind zones around the 7-Eleven, the Seattle Police Department escalated to a Level 2 search, expanding the search radius beyond the immediate commercial area to include natural zones, trails, and locations capable of concealing a person on a rainy night. The complete absence of any trace of Emily after 9:45 p.m. forced SPD to consider the possibility that the victim had left the commercial area and entered poorly lit zones where cameras could not observe. The Rainier Valley area features many dense tree strips, connectors to small parks, trails leading down toward Chief Sylph Trail, and patches of wooded land interspersed among residential zones, all factors making expanded search urgent. On the morning of the Level 2 deployment, search teams were divided into 4 groups. The first focused on pedestrian paths connecting from the parking lot to behind the row of shops. The second swept the small park near Rainier Playfield. The third searched along Chief Sylph Trail, particularly segments with near-total natural canopy from dense trees. The fourth surveyed vacant lots and abandoned parking areas within a 1.5 kilometers radius of the scene. The previous night's rain left many damp surfaces, aiding observation of skid marks or footprints, but it could also have erased traces if the event occurred hours earlier. While sweeping the alley behind the 7-Eleven, search teams found several areas of minor soil disturbance, but nothing sufficient to determine timing. These soil marks could have been caused by store carts moving through during the day or residents discarding trash, as none matched shapes consistent with dragging, struggling, or pulling a heavy object. The rear alley also had many standing water pools, making it impossible to visually distinguish fresh from old footprints. From this alley leading to a narrow path running between two housing blocks, search teams expanded to the slope road heading west up Rainier Avenue S, an area with low light and typically low pedestrian traffic at night. Teams used high-powered lights to examine every road edge, shrub and patch of grass, but found no clothing, items or bags matching what Emily was carrying when she left the store. Moving to Rainier Playfield Park, search forces concentrated on the perimeter areas where soft soil and thick fallen leaves could preserve signs if someone entered at night. However, most of the ground had been channeled into small ruts by rainwater, distorting any traces. A grassy area near the baseball field was churned into mud patches, but cross-checked park activity logs suggested this was likely from athletes or dogs the previous afternoon. Search teams could not confirm any sign related to a teenager walking or being led into the area. Meanwhile, the third team swept Chief South Trail, considered the most sensitive due to many nearly fully canopied segments by large trees. At a point about 1.2 kilometers from the scene, searchers found an area of deeper than normal soil disturbance, appearing as if someone had stepped into soft ground, then into bushes. Upon close inspection, SPD noted the tracks were too wide, most likely from animal movement post-rain rather than human footprints. Soil probe tests showed the surface had been washed clean by rain to the point where trace freshness could not be analyzed. A broken stick was found nearby, but likely from wind-fallen branches, no scratch marks, hair fibers, or impact signs. In abandoned parking lots and old sheds more than 1 kilometer away, search teams used lights to check every dark corner, but the locations contained only trash, rotted crates, and items discarded over years. No signs indicated anyone had been brought there in the past 24 hours. The end-of-day report noted several areas of disturbed soil, but insufficient basis to link them to the disappearance. No drag marks, no footprints matching Emily's size, no personal items dropped across the entire expanded area. This led SPD to conclude that if coercion occurred, it did not take place within the 1.5 kilometers radius around the scene, or the involved party moved very quickly and left no easily identifiable traces. The final note in the Level 2 search team report emphasized that the lack of essential leads required continued re-evaluation of data and expansion of investigative directions into scenarios not fully reliant on physical field searches. After 2 levels of search yielded no clear leads, and the reconstruction of Emily's route still pointed to an unexplained gap right in front of the 7-Eleven, the Seattle Police Department shifted focus to identifying the man appearing in multiple cameras around the time of disappearance. This was the only individual continuously present in frames from 9:45 to 9:47 p.m., precisely when Emily left camera view. Based on the store clerk's description and some witness accounts, SPD reviewed individuals frequently seen around the store at night, including residents of the opposite apartment block and regular late-night customers. Using the blurry silhouette from the phone repair shop camera, a tall figure in a dark coat, police cross-referenced with lists of similar-looking people in the area. The clerk stated, "The man did not appear to be irregular." Information from a passing pedestrian witness also described a tall and somewhat thin man wearing a dark hat, sufficiently similar to narrow the scope to residents around Rainier Avenue said, known to be out at night. Among those reviewed, one name emerged, Alan Grant, 32 years old, living in an apartment complex about 2 blocks from the store. He was nearly 6'0" inches tall, thin build, and often wore a dark coat when heading to or from late shifts. The physical match and geographic proximity made SPD view Allen as the priority person to contact. When located, Allen was cooperative and readily stated that on that night he had passed the 7-Eleven to buy cigarettes but found it crowded or decided against going in. So he stood outside briefly then left. This partially matched witness accounts of a man standing under the overhang for several dozen seconds. SPD immediately asked Allen to recount his schedule that evening. According to him, his shift ended at 9 p.m. at a packaging warehouse in Georgetown. He left work around 9:10 p.m., caught bus route 36 to Rainier Valley, and got off near the 7-Eleven around 9:40 p.m. He walked past the store, and instead of going in, stood under the overhang due to heavy rain, then headed home. To verify, investigators checked Route 36 bus schedules. Per October 18, 2008 evening data, the bus was at the Georgetown stop at 9:12 p.m. and reached Rainier Avenue S between 9:38 and 9:41 p.m., making Allen's travel timeline plausible. SPD further checked warehouse time clock records. Internal logs confirmed Allen clocked out at 9:04 p.m., consistent with his statement. Coworkers confirmed he left on time with no unusual behavior that evening. When asked if he had seen or interacted with Emily at the store, he completely denied it. He said he was only sheltering from rain, paid no attention to people coming and going, and left after less than a minute. However, cameras lacked sufficient clarity to fully confirm his account. The phone repair shop camera captured only a blurry figure. The apartment building camera showed unclear motion. SPD had no video clearly showing Allen leaving in which direction, nor footage of him walking home. This created an alibi gap, while travel time seemed reasonable. No visual proof existed that Allen did not approach or follow Emily. Police checked his shoes and coat, but found no notable mud and no physical evidence matching any Level 2 search locations. When asked if he would allow phone checks to verify movements, he stated his phone at the time was a basic model without GPS, consistent with 2008 user norms. The complete lack of digital data meant SPD could neither prove nor disprove that he moved into a risk area right after Emily left camera view. Investigators also evaluated behavior. In initial questioning, Allen showed no evasion or defensiveness, did not change his story under repeated questioning, and left no unaccounted gaps except the walk from bus stop to home. He had no criminal history, no signs of substance issues, and no prior violent offenses. Still, this was insufficient to rule him out in Emily's disappearance. Investigators noted in reports that Allen was considered a person of interest based on circumstantial factors, appearing at the sensitive time, in the camera-blind location, matching witness descriptions, but without physical evidence or contradictory statements to charge him. With no other viable options, and no other individuals appearing in that time frame, SPD had to keep Allen as a temporary investigative focus. In the end-of-day note, investigators concluded, Grant remains a person of interest, insufficient evidence for exclusion or arrest. This placed Allen at the center of the investigation, even though all data remained suggestive and could not advance further at that point. After focusing on suspect Allen Grant without obtaining corroborating evidence, the Seattle Police Department returned to a detailed re-evaluation of Maya and Dylan's statements, the last two people to see Emily before she vanished. This step was necessary to determine if any contradictions existed in the sequence of events they provided, or if details were inadvertently omitted due to panic on the night of the incident. SPD began by placing both statements on the standardized timeline established from cameras and the payment receipt. In initial statements, Maya said Emily left the store around 9:45 or 46, while Dylan said around 9:44 to 9:47. Cross-checked against camera data, the precise time was 9 hours 45 minutes and 3 seconds, falling within both ranges. Investigators noted that a 1 to 2 minute discrepancy in time estimation is common among stressed witnesses and could not be considered suspiciously contradictory. However, when analyzing events after Emily exited the store, SPD began noting several differences between Maya and Dylan regarding positions and sequence of actions. Maya stated that when she and Dylan stepped out, they did not see Emily in front of the car and immediately assumed she had walked into the dark northeast corner of the lot. Dylan stated he initially thought Emily was under the overhang or opening the car door. When re-interviewed, both adjusted to Emily may have taken a few steps before getting in the car, but neither could firmly confirm they clearly saw which way Emily turned. One point that drew investigator attention was their description of how long they stood by the car before starting to search. Maya said they waited under a minute before spreading out to look, but Dylan said 2 to 3 minutes. This discrepancy could affect time models for how far Emily could have moved or left the area. When asked to describe the distance from the car to the store, Maya said about 20 meters, while Dylan estimated 35 meters. Later camera and measurements confirmed the actual distance at about 27 meters. This mismatch, though not severe, still prompted SPD to question whether differences in spatial perception might have skewed their assessment of where Emily went in those critical seconds. The next issue concerned descriptions of the man near the store. In the first interview, Maya only said, "I saw someone standing near the door, maybe wearing a hat or dark clothes," while Dylan said someone standing a bit to the right, facing away when we came out. However, in the second interview, both described relatively similarly that the man was tall, thin-build, dark coat. This convergence caught SPD's attention because Maya's initial statement made no mention of height or build. When asked, Maya said she didn't remember clearly the first time due to panic, and only after talking again with Dylan did the image become clearer. This is not uncommon when witnesses are close friends, but it also led investigators to note the possibility of unintentional memory alignment through discussion. SPD also noted an unusual convergence in how both described that Emily may have stood near that man for a few seconds. Notably, in the initial interview, neither mentioned possible interaction, but in the follow-up both used similar near-identical hypothetical phrasing. When asked if they had discussed this hypothesis beforehand, Maya and Dylan denied it, explaining that when mentally replaying the situation, they realized the only place Emily could have sheltered from rain was under the overhang where the man stood. While logical, SPD still recorded the possibility that the two influenced each other's perceptions in reconstructing events. Another noteworthy point was statements about when they began calling Emily. Maya said she called right after running a loop around the lot, within under 2 minutes of exiting the store. Dylan said he tried calling when I saw Maya getting worried, maybe 3 to 4 minutes later. Phone records from Maya's phone showed the first call at 9:48 p.m., about 3 minutes after Emily exited. This aligned more closely with Dylan's statement than Maya's, but SPD assessed it as possible memory distortion due to stress. Continuing the analysis, SPD found no accusatory contradictions or signs of concealment, but numerous gaps and detail shifts between interviews made pinpointing exactly what happened that night more difficult. Investigators concluded that Maya and Dylan's statements showed differences in timing, space, and attention level, but these inconsistencies were not strong enough to indicate deliberate deception or criminal involvement. At the same time, the unusual convergence in suspect description led SPD to note that their memories may have been influenced through mutual discussion rather than remaining fully independent. In the end-of-day report, investigators wrote, "Witness statements show inconsistencies, but no evidence of deliberate fabrication. Memory contamination possible." This forced SPD to continue treating Maya and Dylan's statements as supplementary sources, but not as an absolute foundation for determining Emily's final path. Despite conducting multiple investigative avenues simultaneously, expanded searches, camera analysis, verification of potential suspects, and cross-checking witness statements, the Seattle Police Department obtained no breakthrough leads related to Emily Vargas's disappearance. In the following weeks, every effort yielded the same repeated result: no physical evidence, no traces, no new witnesses, and no indication that Emily had left the area via public transportation or personal vehicle. Checks of all hospitals, John Jane Doe intake centers, shelters, and emergency receiving facilities turned up no matching cases for Emily. The search radius was expanded 3 times, first within the commercial district, second into adjacent forests and parks, and third extending along Chief Self Trail all the way to its side branches, leading into eastern residential areas. In all 3 phases, search teams found no signs indicating Emily had ever appeared in any of those areas after leaving camera view. The small bag, containing a few personal items that Emily was carrying when she exited the store, was also never located anywhere. In similar missing persons cases in Seattle, Investigators usually had at least one anchor point, an item left behind, shoe prints, a witness hearing a scream, or unusual movement captured on nearby roadway cameras. But in Emily's case, all such elements were completely absent. The disappearance occurred in an extremely brief window, only a few dozen seconds from the time Emily left the store, yet it left no tangible consequences, making it impossible for investigators to build any hypothesis grounded in physical reality to pursue. The sole suspect direction at that time, Alan Grant, produced no results after multiple rounds of questioning and rote verification, no clear inconsistencies in his alibi, no visual evidence showing he approached Emily, and no physical evidence in his home or on his person. All the police had to go on was the suspicious coincidence of timing and his position near the store. However, the law does not permit proceeding to the next step without any physical evidence or contradictory statements. Keeping Alan under suspicion without basis also risked derailing the investigation, something SPD had to carefully avoid. At the same time, the statements from Maya and Dylan remained a problematic element. Despite minor discrepancies across interviews, there were no signs they were withholding information or involved in criminal activity. Both cooperated early on, providing detailed timelines and participating in crime scene reconstructions as requested. But the differences in memory regarding time markers, Emily's position, and descriptions of the unknown man made their statements unusable as a reliable data source for expanding the investigation. Without additional supporting evidence, continuing to focus on the accounts of these two witnesses would only trap the investigation in a loop. By mid-2009, after expending more than 500 hours of field searching, dozens of image collections, over 30 witness interviews, and multiple independent analyses, Emily Vargas's case file remained stalled. Periodic reports repeated the same conclusion: no new data, no identified criminal indicators, and no viable investigative direction to pursue further. SPD maintained passive monitoring status, but could not justify continued active investigation when every lid had dead-ended. By early 2010, after 15 months with no recorded progress, the case was transferred to the Cold Case Unit per Seattle Police Department procedure for long-term unsolved missing persons cases. This status change did not mean the case was forgotten. Rather, it shifted to preservation mode. The file was archived, data would be updated if new information emerged, and the case could be reopened if future technology or evidence surfaced. However, for the Vargas family and the broader Rainier Valley community, the cold case label was a heavy milestone. It marked the official acknowledgement that after hundreds of hours of searching and investigation, no effort had produced any explanation for the disappearance in mere dozens of seconds of a 17-year-old teenager. In the official March 2010 report, SPD noted, all active leads exhausted, no physical evidence, no verified sightings, no confirmed suspect. Case reclassified as cold case per procedure. Emily Vargas's disappearance officially entered a state of stasis, with no specific investigative direction and no new information for many years afterward. In 2022, during the Cold Case Unit's routine case review cycle at the Seattle Police Department, unsolved missing persons files from 2015 were placed on a re-evaluation list to identify cases that could benefit from new technology. Within this group, the Emily Vargas case stood out, not because of abundant data, but because of its unusual poverty of data, virtually no physical evidence, no digital traces, no clear criminal indicators, and the entire 2008-2009 investigation relying on low-resolution cameras and inconsistent witness statements. When Detective Lena Harwood, a specialist in behavioral analysis and crime scene reconstruction under data-scarce conditions, reviewed the file, she immediately recognized methodological shortcomings that had previously been dismissed as technological limitations of the era. First, the 2008 search radius assessment relied almost entirely on visual geographic judgment rather than the geospatial analysis now standard in 2022. This caused SPD at the time to overlook many plausible hypotheses, such as escape routes through the southeast parking lot, covered walkways along the strip mall, or small turnoffs between houses that investigative maps did not clearly mark. Next, Harwood noted that 2008 camera analysis was limited to basic time matching and identification. It did not apply any image enhancement, cross-camera time synchronization, or motion interpolation, techniques now routinely performed with specialized software. As a result, the entire sequence in the camera blind spot around the store was treated as an impenetrable dark zone, whereas modern shadow and motion analysis could extract far more information from footage previously considered useless. Additionally, Harwood identified a critical weakness in the 2008 file. Maya and Dylan's statements were recorded, but never subjected to linguistic reliability assessment, a method that became standard in missing persons investigations by the 2010s. The file merely documented the content of their accounts without analyzing sentence structure, detail level, unusual shifts across retellings, or differences in how they described the victim's actions. This was why the minor inconsistencies in the two witnesses' accounts were treated only as memory drift rather than evaluated against investigative psychology criteria. Another point that caught Harwood's attention was the 2008 verification of suspect Alan Grant, which relied solely on interviews and bus route cross-checking without behavioral assessment, optimal path analysis, victim accessibility probability based on location, or any application of offender spatial behavior modeling. This left Alan in suspect status purely due to coincidental presence, yet without sufficient grounds to definitively rule him out. Harwood realized the entire file had been constructed from disconnected points. The time Emily entered the store, the time she exited, the shadow of the unknown man, Maya and Dylan's statements, and the failed search efforts. No report attempted to connect these facts into an overall pattern or reconstruct events in a logical sequence, something modern investigation considers mandatory. That was why Detective Harwood believed the Emily Vargas case was not deadlocked due to a lack of clues, but because the investigative methods of the time lacked the tools to accurately read the few sparse clues scattered throughout the file. With this assessment, she recommended reopening the case and immediately placed it on the reopened cold case high priority review list. The proposal was approved based on 3 criteria. The disappearance occurred in an urban residential area, multiple cameras, albeit low quality, were present, and at least one potential suspect had not been thoroughly cleared. Harwood began by developing a comprehensive reinvestigation plan to 2022 standards. The plan had 4 components. First, geospatial crime scene reconstruction, combining heat maps of movement and accessibility modeling to determine every possible direction Emily could have taken in the roughly 120 seconds after leaving the store. Second, digitization of all legacy video for processing with image restoration software, brightness enhancement, noise reduction and shadow motion analysis to identify movement the naked eye missed in 2008. Third, reanalysis of Maya and Dylan's statements using modern linguistic reliability criteria to assess consistency, credibility, and potential memory contamination. Fourth, full review of Alan Grant's location, timing and travel data using 2022 statistical crime behavior modeling and journey reconstruction. Ultimately, the plan's goal was not to affirm any hypothesis, but to re-examine all data through a fresh lens to uncover details previously overlooked. Harwood wrote in her opening report, "This case failed, not because of the absence of evidence, but because the evidence was never fully interpreted." The official reopening of the Emily Vargas file began here, the first time in 12 years that this seemingly unsolvable disappearance returned to active investigative scrutiny. The first step in Detective Lena Harwood's reinvestigation plan was reprocessing all 2008 video using AI-based image restoration and motion analysis, techniques unavailable when the case originally occurred. All original DVR tapes from the 7-Eleven, phone repair shop, apartment parking lot, and residential building were redigitized at the highest extractable resolution. Harwood submitted the data to specialized enhancement software capable of brightness synchronization, motion interpolated frame upsampling, rain noise reduction, and edge-based shadow separation. Over the past decade plus, these techniques had helped crack many old missing persons cases by recovering details previously invisible to the technology of the era. When the footage was reprocessed, the first major change appeared in the 7-Eleven exterior camera, capturing Emily exiting the store. Enhanced brightness made it possible to clearly identify the figure moving near her. What had previously been a dark blob now resolved into a man standing under the overhang. But his actual position did not fully match Maya and Dylan's description. The figure in the video had broad shoulders, an upright posture, and was noticeably shorter than initially estimated. When compared against Alan Grant's physical measurements, the software's size analysis showed the man was at least 5'7" centimeters shorter than Alan, and had different shoulder-to-hip proportions. This contradicted the prior assumption that Alan was the person standing near the store at the moment Emily stepped out. The software also detected subtle movement in the man's stance. He was leaning toward the wall, unlike the standing in the middle of the shelter description given by witnesses. After comparing the full image dataset, Harwood determined the man in the video was a different individual, not Alan Grant, and no camera captured Alan at the storefront position during the time he was supposedly sheltering from the rain. Thus, the sole early suspect, formed only from vague similarity, turned out not to be the person appearing on video, forcing SPD to eliminate Alan from the suspect track. Harwood did not stop there. She continued by analyzing Maya and Dylan's appearance in the apartment building camera across the street. Previously, due to blurriness and distance, 2008 SPD had only noted that two figures exited the store a few minutes after Emily, without being able to pinpoint their exact positions. AI interpolation of frames allowed the software to determine their relative positions to the car door. The results showed Maya and Dylan were closer to the vehicle than initially claimed. Instead of taking 2 minutes to exit the store, video placed them appearing roughly 40-50 seconds after Emily. This dramatically shortened the time Emily was alone in the camera blind spot compared to the estimate used in the 2008 investigative model. Additionally, the camera data recorded that Maya and Dylan's initial movement was not diverging in two directions as they described, but both walking quickly toward the northwest corner of the parking lot, an area that did not match the direction they claimed to have first searched for Emily. This directional discrepancy meant either their memories had significantly distorted over time, or their 2008 statements did not accurately reflect reality. In either scenario, SPD had to conclude that Maya and Dylan's accounts could no longer serve as a precise reference for Emily's actions during the critical seconds. In the next step, Harwood applied motion analysis software to retrace the figure appearing in the phone repair shop video at 21 hours, 46 minutes, and 12 seconds. Image restoration confirmed the figure was moving southeast, completely opposite the direction Alan Grant claimed he took home. This further reinforced that Alan was neither the man in the video nor someone who directly contacted Emily on the night she vanished. With the new visual evidence, Harwood formally eliminated Alan Grant from the suspect list, downgrading him from person of interest to not relevant to physical movements on scene. The video analysis report stated clearly, "The unidentified male captured is not Alan Grant. Physical proportions and movement patterns do not match." This forced the investigation to abandon the only direction pursued throughout the case's early phase. At the same time, the discrepancies between Maya and Dylan's statements and their actual video-verified positions raised the possibility that previously blurry footage might contain many important details that went uninterpreted in 2008. The modern technological reanalysis of the video created the first major turning point of the reopening. The initial suspect was completely eliminated, while the credibility of the statements from the only two people present with the victim was severely undermined, compelling SPD to re-examine the entire understanding of what happened in the moments immediately before Emily disappeared. After modern video analysis eliminated the original suspect and exposed discrepancies between statements and the actual positions of Maya and Dylan, Detective Lena Harwood moved to the next phase, reanalyzing the 2008 statements using statement analysis combined with forensic NLP to evaluate language structure, consistency levels, and potential evasion markers embedded in each response. All original statement transcripts, including initial accounts, retellings after a few hours, and supplemental interviews, were converted to digital text so the NLP software could segment sentences, identify subjects, compare detail density, and flag linguistic shifts over time. In the first pass, Harwood noticed Maya's statements contained an unusually high density of qualifiers, such as possibly, it seemed like, I think, and probably, when describing the minutes after Emily left the store. These qualifiers, indicating conjecture rather than direct observation, do not necessarily prove deception, but in missing persons investigations, they often signal a witness filling memory gaps with inference, which can lead to the formation of false memories. When comparing Maya's different accounts, however, the NLP highlighted that possibly and probably did not appear when she described her own and Dylan's actions, only when she referred to Emily's position. This suggested to Harwood that Maya tended to describe Emily's behavior based on assumption rather than direct observation. For Dylan, the software detected structural sentence shifts across interviews. In the first account, he used active voice for his own actions. I went out. I looked around. I checked. In the second account, he shifted to passive or agentless constructions. We went out. There was searching around. There was checking the lot. When directly asked who did what, Dylan repeatedly responded with we instead of I. This is a linguistic pattern commonly associated with witnesses attempting to diffuse personal responsibility or blur their individual role in a specific sequence. Statement analysis also revealed that when describing the time spent standing by the car before beginning to search for Emily, Maya included small sensory details, such as rain hitting my hair, and I heard cars passing on the street, while Dylan provided no sensory or auditory details at all, merely stating, stood there a few minutes. Research on statement analysis frequently flags the absence of sensory detail during critical event descriptions as an indicator that the narrator was not truly present in the situation as described or deliberately avoided specificity. The NLP software continued by cross-referencing Maya's and Dylan's statements for abnormal lexical alignment. Results showed both used the exact phrase, Emily possibly stood under the overhang for a few seconds during the second interview. Despite neither using it in the first interview, statement analysis flagged this as lexical duplication, a phenomenon where independent statements share identical phrasing, often occurring when witnesses confer before retelling or inadvertently adopt each other's wording. The fact that both used the same speculative phrase raised questions for Harwood about whether they were jointly solidifying a common narrative to explain Emily's disappearance. Another notable finding came from emotion keyword analysis. Maya used numerous terms conveying anxiety and panic, consistent with the psychology of someone who lost track of her younger sister for a few minutes. In contrast, Dylan used almost no emotion words throughout his descriptions, even when referencing the moment he realized Emily was no longer in the lot. Instead, he relied on neutral, fixed constructions, such as didn't see her anywhere, not sure, don't remember. The complete absence of emotional description in statements about a shocking event caused the NLP model to flag high incongruence, a mismatch between event content and expression style. This is frequently an indicator that the speaker is deliberately keeping the account minimal to avoid revealing additional information. When Harwood compared the original statements against Maya and Dylan's video-verified actual positions, the gaps in Dylan's account became even more pronounced. He claimed to have stood farther from the store than he actually did, described search directions inconsistent with video, and said he attempted to call Emily earlier than call log data showed. Each individual discrepancy could be explained by faulty memory, but their simultaneous appearance in one person's statements increased the likelihood, per the analysis, that Dylan had adjusted his narrative after the disappearance occurred. Based on the aggregated linguistic analysis, Harwood concluded that Maya's statements exhibited characteristics of stress-induced memory noise, while Dylan's contained multiple markers of avoidance, personal role minimization, and abnormal coordination with Maya's account. This elevated Dylan to high suspicion status, not because of direct evidence, but because his statements failed to align accurately with what later video and timing data revealed. Harwood's final report stated clearly, Dylan Brooks's statements contain multiple linguistic avoidance markers and coordination indicators. His account requires further scrutiny. For the first time since 2008, Dylan was flagged as a subject requiring deeper analysis rather than merely the last witness to see Emily. While the linguistic analysis had made Dylan's statement more suspicious than ever, an unexpected development emerged when the cold case unit posted a call for new witnesses in the Capitol Hill and Rainier Valley areas, two locations tied to the final movements of Emily. The notice was placed on local community platforms and spread rapidly through social media, leading to a contact from a person named Riley Carver with SPD in the third week of the reinvestigation. Riley, 31 years old, was a student living in Capitol Hill in 2008 and claimed to have witnessed a significant event on the evening Emily disappeared, but at the time did not report it to the police because he thought it was unrelated or did not want to get involved in an unclear matter. When interviewed in the cold case unit meeting room, Riley described that between approximately 8 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. that evening, he walked past the parking lot behind the apartment complex where Dylan had just moved. He remembered it clearly because that day it was only drizzling, unlike the heavy rain that arrived after 9 p.m. And he often took the shortcut through that area to buy food. While passing by, Riley saw Emily and Dylan standing next to a sedan that, from his observation, appeared to be owned or driven by Dylan. Riley recounted that the two were arguing intensely. Emily said something loudly that he could not make out, but the tone clearly conveyed annoyance. Dylan stood facing her, hands slightly raised in a manner suggesting explanation or objection. Riley could not hear the content of the argument due to the distance and the noise of cars on Broadway, but he remembered the attitudes very clearly. Emily appeared angry, while Dylan looked tense and defensive. The most important detail Riley repeated was that after Emily turned to walk away, Dylan reached out and touched her arm in an attempt to hold her back. It was not a violent action, but noticeable enough for Riley to remember because it seemed somewhat intimate or insistent. Emily immediately pulled her arm away and walked off faster. About 2 or 3 minutes later, Maya came down from the apartment staircase and called out to Emily in a slightly irritated tone, seemingly unaware of what had just happened. The three of them then got into the car and left Capitol Hill together. To Riley, the incident at the time looked like a squabble between siblings or close friends, with no dangerous elements, so he did not think he needed to report it to anyone. However, when he read about SPD reopening the Emily case in 2022, the detail that she was last seen only a few dozen minutes after leaving Capitol Hill made Riley believe that argument could be important. Investigator Harwood immediately compared the information Riley provided with Dylan's 2008 statement. In the original statement, Dylan clearly said there had been no argument whatsoever before they left the apartment, even describing the atmosphere as normal, cheerful, and stating that all three had decided together to head to Rainier Valley, so Dylan could finish moving a few remaining boxes. Maya also made no mention of any dispute between Emily and Dylan before getting in the car. This created a direct contradiction. Riley asserted he had witnessed a clear argument lasting at least a minute, including a hand-pulling action, while both Maya and Dylan described that afternoon as completely normal. When questioned closely, Riley emphasized that he was not mistaken about the day, because the event happened right after he received a text from a classmate canceling a study group, a message with a timestamp preserved on an old device he still kept. The message data he provided to SPD confirmed the timing at approximately 8:04 p.m., matching when Riley passed the parking lot. This detail strengthened the credibility of the new statement. Even more notably, Riley's statement showed that Emily's mood before arriving in Rainier Valley did not match the normal state described by Maya and Dylan. If she had been arguing directly with Dylan and reacted by yanking her arm away, it could have affected her emotional state at the 7-Eleven store, an element that had been downplayed in the 2008 investigation. Harwood immediately noted that this information opened a new investigative direction regarding motive, because an argument shortly before the disappearance could not be considered a random factor. Forensic NLP analysis of Dylan's 2008 statement had previously flagged his avoidance of mentioning Emily's emotions, and now Riley's statement confirmed that Dylan had reason to downplay detail in that part. Moreover, the fact that Dylan proactively stated there was no argument despite an eyewitness seeing the opposite event directly led Harwood to question what was Dylan hiding. Riley's statement also helped establish that the interaction between Emily and Dylan on the evening of the incident was not simply the normal cousin relationship described in the 2008 file. The tension at Capitol Hill may have been a prelude to the unusual event in the 7-Eleven parking lot, or at the very least, showed that Dylan played an active role in the sequence leading up to Emily's disappearance. When RTP cross-referenced Riley's statement with recovered video data, it also indicated that Emily exited the store with a faster-than-normal gait, consistent with a psychological state influenced by the prior argument. The fact that Riley's statement completely differed from Dylan's, but aligned with signs in the video, led Harwood to conclude that Dylan was not merely the last witness, but potentially a person with motive or direct involvement in the chain of events leading to the disappearance. The report concluding the new witness analysis stated clearly, Riley Carver provides independently verifiable information contradicting Dylan's 2008 statement. New narrative suggests pre-incident conflict. Investigation must re-center around Dylan Brooks as primary point of inquiry. For the first time since 2008, the case had a breakthrough investigative direction, grounded not in speculation but in a new witness, a consistent statement, and cross-verified data, opening up an entirely different motive structure from what the original file had recorded. After Riley Carver's statement placed Dylan Brooks at the center of suspicion, Detective Lena Harwood moved to the next step in the re-investigation plan, tracking down the vehicle Dylan had used on the night Emily Vargas disappeared. In 2008, the silver-gray four-door sedan registered to Maya, but driven by Dylan was mentioned repeatedly in the file, and it was the only vehicle appearing in every description related to the group's movements that evening. However, according to registration records, the car was sold in 2009 to someone in Kent, then changed hands twice more before disappearing from original records because the third owner failed to renew registration. This made locating the vehicle more complicated than anticipated. Harwood began by contacting the first owner after Maya to confirm the sale date and reason for transfer. That person stated he bought the car in nearly original condition, with no significant damage, and sold it 8 months later to a buyer in Auburn. The second buyer was contacted next, and fortunately, this person still had a copy of the bill of sale, allowing the cold case unit to identify the final owner, a man named Paul Hotchkiss, who had lived in Renton but moved away in 2017. SPD spent nearly a week checking records and ultimately determined the sedan was now in an impound lot for seized vehicles due to expired registration since 2020. The vehicle remained listed in a King County storage yard. When Harwood personally inspected it, the sedan sat at the end of a row, thick with dust, interior peeling, but the frame structure and trunk remained intact and suitable for forensic examination. Finding the car after 14 years was a turning point in the investigation, as a vehicle is capable of preserving long-term traces far better than an outdoor scene. SPD immediately requested the vehicle be sealed and transferred to the forensics lab for the highest level of detailed examination. Initially, forensic technicians scanned the entire trunk using optical light and specialized LED lamps. Although dust and time-induced wear had faded many traces, a wear mark on the trunk floor immediately drew attention. A streak about 48 centimeters long, with parallel uniform lines, unlike natural wear from luggage and bearing characteristics of dragging a heavy object. The wear consisted of two parallel streaks, spaced about 30 centimeters apart, very close to the average shoulder width of a 16-18-year-old teenager. Forensics immediately tested samples of the mark to determine microscopic structure. Microscopic analysis confirmed that paint fibers and metal particles in the wear did not match typical suitcase or cardboard box materials, but were consistent with contact from something soft yet significantly weighted, possibly a shoulder, back, or upper body of a person. Harwood immediately ordered further testing with luminol to detect biological traces, even at trace levels. Although no clear blood fluorescence appeared, a small area near the right edge of the trunk showed a weak reaction, difficult to distinguish due to the vehicle's age and oxidation level, but still sufficient for sampling. The sample was sent to the DNA lab, but due to high degradation, no identification result could be obtained. However, the presence of a luminol reaction was still considered valuable because the trunk is not an area that typically holds organic material. In parallel with trunk examination, the forensics team processed the undercarriage, where mud and soil often remain trapped for long periods. While scraping mud from the rear crossmember, technicians found soil samples with color and texture inconsistent with the Rainier Valley area. The soil sample was sent to SPD's Forensic Geology Lab. After 2 days of analysis, results showed the mineral composition in the mud, including high montmorillonite clay, glacial clay sediment, and a small amount of natural coal particles, matched the distinctive soil type found in the Cougar Mountain and Coal Creek Natural Area region of Bellevue, an area with clearly distinct geology from Seattle soil. This was particularly significant because no evidence in the old file indicated the group had been in that area on the night Emily disappeared, and according to Dylan's statement, the car only traveled from Capitol Hill to Rainier Valley and then back home. Finding Cougar Mountain-specific soil in the undercarriage showed the vehicle had passed through that area or an adjacent one around the time of the disappearance, as soil trapped in undercarriage crevices only adheres when driving on unpaved trails or loose dirt roads. This data completely contradicted Dylan's 2008 statement and could not be explained by memory error. Harwood immediately regarded this as the first physical evidence capable of directly linking Dylan Brooks to a forested area, a remote, sparsely trafficked space with terrain suitable for concealment behavior. Additionally, during close trunk inspection, forensics found a very short dark brown hair caught between the trunk's rubber seal. The hair sample was too small and degraded to extract DNA, but the color matched Emily's description. She had dark brown hair. Harwood noted that while this evidence was insufficient for identification, it held supportive value when combined with the wear marks and soil sample. When compiling all forensic results, the report stated clearly, physical evidence indicates non-routine use of trunk and exposure to soil consistent with Cougar Mountain region. This was the first conclusive statement in the entire file from 2008 to 2022, rather than speculation. The fact that Dylan's vehicle showed traces related to a forested area he claimed never to have visited not only undermined his alibi, but also forced SPD to consider the possibility that Emily had been taken or brought to that area. With this new finding, the investigation shifted from indirect analysis to, for the first time, possessing physical evidence linking a suspect to a specific location. All subsequent investigative directions now had to focus on the connection between Dylan Brooks, his vehicle, and the Cougar Mountain region, an entirely absent link in the initial investigation. When the forensic report on Dylan Brooks's old sedan was finalized, Detective Lena Harwood moved to the most critical phase of the reinvestigation, constructing a comprehensive event model by integrating all data from 2008 cameras, witness statements, new forensic data, and the vehicle's position based on undercarriage soil analysis. The focus was no longer on disjointed speculations as 14 years earlier, but on reconstructing a logically consistent timeline supported by physical evidence. The first step was re-establishing the three-person group's movement from Capitol Hill to Rainier Valley, based on surviving traffic camera signals and convenience store receipt timestamps. The store camera recorded Emily leaving the frame at 8:41 p.m., while Maya and Dylan reappeared outside the store at 8:43 p.m., with no trace of Emily returning. Based on the limited camera angle and 2022 AI analysis, Harwood determined that immediately after Emily stepped out of the store, there was a blind spot extending from the edge of the parking lot to the alley behind, an area not covered by any remaining operational cameras. From here, the cold case unit began connecting the timeline with forensic data from the vehicle, undercarriage soil, matching Cougar Mountain and trunk wear, consistent with dragging a heavy object around the time the vehicle could have left Rainier Valley. Harwood mapped possible routes by eliminating all high camera density paths Dillon could not have avoided in 2008. Analysis showed only one plausible route from Rainier Valley toward Bellevue via I-90 or Renton, then turning onto smaller roads leading to the Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park area. This route significantly matched the glacial clay sediment unique to the vehicle's undercarriage. Next, Riley Carver's statement about the argument between Dillon and Emily in Capitol Hill before leaving became a crucial piece to explain the motive leading to abnormal action immediately after the group left the convenience store. Harwood incorporated this data into the event model, combined with linguistic analysis of Dillon's statement showing multiple avoidance segments and structural shifts when questioned about the moment Emily left site. When combined with Maya's statement, which showed signs of attempting to align details with Dillon, the initial model emerged. Emily left observation, encountered Dillon outside the recorded area, a brief altercation or confrontation occurred, leading to Emily being quickly subdued and placed in the vehicle. This matched the trunk wear marks, which indicated dragging a heavy object under rushed conditions. Then, indirect vehicle position data indicated the distance traveled that night from Rainier Valley to Cougar Mountain was the most logical, not only because it fit the geology, but also due to the remote nature of the trails, consistent with a body or evidence concealment pattern. Harwood also reviewed all old statement data to identify anomalies. Dillon always insisted he dropped Maya off immediately after leaving the store. But this did not match a timestamp from a private camera 3 blocks away, showing the vehicle leaving the area 12 minutes later than Dillon claimed. This 12-minute gap aligned with the blind spot when Emily disappeared from camera view. When integrated into the model, Harwood concluded this was the period during which Dillon placed Emily in the vehicle and drove away before returning to pick up Maya, or providing some explanation that prevented Maya from noticing anything unusual. Next, Harwood used crime route simulation software based on 2008 camera avoidance feasibility. The model showed that to reach Cougar Mountain without passing fixed traffic cameras, Dillon would have had to leave Rainier Valley toward Renton, cross NE Sunset Boulevard, then turn onto the Lakemont Trail system, an area whose mineral composition matched the undercarriage soil. When these pieces were placed together, for the first time in the entire file a coherent scenario appeared. Personal conflict occurred before leaving Capitol Hill. Tension continued to escalate upon reaching Rainier Valley. The incident erupted after Emily left camera view. Dillon subdued Emily and placed her in the trunk, then drove to Cougar Mountain to conceal her. This model not only matched all physical evidence, but also explained every contradiction in the 2008 statements, including Maya's denial of hearing any unusual noises, and Dillon's assertion that he never left Seattle that night. The data integration showed that many details in both statements had been adjusted to eliminate travel beyond Rainier Valley, an effort previously undetectable due to lack of forensic data. Harwood's final modeling report concluded, the combined evidence strongly supports a sequence of events involving a confrontation, forced transport and disposal attempt outside Seattle city limits. For the first time since 2008, Emily Vargas's disappearance was described by a unified data-supported verifiable sequence of events, marking a major turning point in the entire reinvestigation. When the event model was completed and approved by Cold Case Unit leadership, SPD decided the time had come to shift from analysis to direct action. Based on physical evidence obtained from the sedan, geological analysis matching Cougar Mountain, contradictions in the 2008 statements, and the movement model indicating the route Dillon may have used, SPD prepared an arrest warrant for Dillon Brooks on charges related to Emily Vargas's disappearance. The warrant was signed by King County District Court on the morning of September 14, 2022. The investigation team decided to execute the arrest at Dillon's workplace in West Seattle to minimize the risk of flight or destruction of related items. When 2 officers approached and informed him of the warrant, Dylan appeared surprised but did not resist, his expression shifting from confusion to defensiveness in seconds. He did not ask why he was being arrested but only repeated the question, after more than 10 years. A reaction Harwood noted as indicative of someone aware of the reason, but trying to feign surprise. Dylan was taken to SPD headquarters for interrogation, where Harwood and Detective Ruiz had prepared tactics based on psychological and linguistic structural analysis from the old statement. The goal was not to force an immediate confession, but to dismantle layer by layer the narrative Dylan had maintained for 14 years, using physical evidence to isolate each part of the old story until it could no longer be sustained. In the early phase of the interrogation, Dylan stuck to his old statement. He never left Seattle, went nowhere except Maya's house, and did not know what happened after Emily stepped out of the store. Harwood began presenting evidence in sequence to create direct conflict between the statement and empirical data. First came the trunk wear marks. Dylan glanced at the photos, but avoided direct engagement, claiming the old car had passed through many owners. Harwood immediately presented the forensic results. Paint and metal samples in the wear matched the vehicle's materials during Maya's ownership, proving the mark occurred while the trunk was still under Dylan's control. His reaction changed markedly. He paused for several seconds before answering, a classic sign of someone adjusting their story on the fly. Next, Harwood presented the undercarriage soil matching Cougar Mountain. This was data Dylan could not explain with any alternative narrative, as he had previously claimed the car only moved around Seattle. Upon hearing the geological analysis, Dylan clenched his hands and shifted to emotional denial, saying every road has dirt. Harwood presented the mineral comparison chart, showing the soil type adhered only in a narrow range of eastern forest roads. Dylan no longer responded, instead looking down at the table, facial muscles tightening, initial signs of argumentative collapse appearing. Harwood continued with the camera evidence. Enhanced 2008 imagery showed Maya and Dylan's actual positions in the parking lot differed from the original statement. Dylan could not explain why he was standing in the area recorded by camera showing an unidentified man, while in 2008 he denied being there. When Harwood placed the AI-analyzed photo in front of Dylan, he suddenly shifted from defensiveness to prolonged silence, a response the SPD profiler assessed as accumulated cognitive pressure. He could no longer maintain consistency in the old statement. Harwood's pivotal decision was to introduce the new witness information, Riley Carver. Upon hearing Riley's name, Dylan looked up for the first time and asked, "Who told her what?" This was a reaction showing awareness of risk, proving Riley's statement hit the point Dylan wanted to hide. Harwood did not answer but simply reiterated details of the Capitol Hill argument, which Dylan had completely denied. From this point, the interrogation tactic shifted to structure collapse. Harwood showed Dylan the movement model, a route perfectly matching camera data, time gap, vehicle position, and undercarriage soil. Dylan no longer countered, only stared at the map and breathed heavily, body tense, showing psychological resistance beginning to weaken. Harwood concluded the evidence chain with a single non-accusatory question aimed at breaking final resistance. "Dylan, was there anything that happened with Emily during those 12 minutes that you didn't want anyone to know?" Dylan bit his lip, eyes reddening, and for the first time throughout the interrogation, he did not respond with denial. The nearly 1-minute silence was regarded as a complete logical break, the shift from defensiveness to being forced to confront the true sequence. All these signs indicated that the narrative structure Dylan had clung to for 14 years had cracked, preparing the way for the true statement SPD had been waiting for. With the collapse of his argument and no longer able to maintain the old narrative, all that remained was the moment Dylan would reveal where Emily was taken after leaving Rainier Valley. When the psychological pressure from the chain of evidence built up to the point where Dylan Brooks could no longer sustain his old story, Detective Harwood moved to the final phase of her interrogation strategy, letting silence pave the way. After more than a minute without a response, Dylan shifted his gaze away from the Cougar Mountain map in front of him, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. Then let out a short sigh, a reaction the profiler identified as a cognitive breaking point. When Harwood gently repeated the question about the unexplained blank, 12 minutes in Rainier Valley, Dylan spoke softly, almost in a lost voice. "I didn't mean to." From that moment his final statement began to unfold. He admitted there had been an argument with Emily even before they left Capitol Hill. Riley Carver was right. The argument erupted over a misunderstanding involving a mutual friend, and although Harwood did not probe deeply into the details of personal motives, she recognized this as the point where Dylan started describing the truth. According to him, when the group stopped at the convenience store in Rainier Valley, the tension inside the car had not yet cooled. Emily stepped out first. Maya went inside to buy water, and Dylan walked around the car to try to calm down. When Emily moved out of the camera frame toward the alley behind the store, Dylan followed with the intention of talking one last time, but the conversation lasted only a few seconds before it turned into a confrontation. Dylan claimed that Emily turned away, saying she wanted to leave the group immediately, and this triggered his impulsiveness. He grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her back. Emily reacted by struggling. During the scuffle, according to Dylan, he pushed harder than intended, a force strong enough to cause Emily to slip and fall, striking her head on the edge of the brick wall behind the store. Dylan described the fall in a choked voice, insisting he thought Emily was only stunned. But when he touched her, Emily did not respond. Her breathing slowed, and blood seeped from the back of her head. Dylan's statement continued in a trembling voice. He panicked, worried that Maya would see or that someone else would discover them, and instead of calling for help, he made a decision that sent the entire case in a different direction. He carried Emily to the car, opened the trunk, and placed her inside. This matched perfectly with the abrasion marks found in the trunk that forensics had described earlier. When Harwood asked why he didn't call for help, Dylan did not answer directly, only repeatedly saying that everything happened too fast, a common form of avoidance in incomplete confessions, but sufficient to confirm the initial behavior. Dylan went on to say that he drove around the residential area several times to check if anyone was following, then decided to leave Seattle that night. At this point, Harwood's simulated route became direct corroborating evidence. She placed the I-405 and NE Sunset Blabd map in front of Dylan and asked him to point out the turns. Dylan indicated exactly the locations predicted by the 2022 model. He drove to the Bellevue outskirts, continuing toward Cougar Mountain Regional Wildland Park. Dylan admitted he had no clear plan, only wanting to find a remote location because he didn't know if Emily was still alive or already dead. When Harwood asked about the last signs of life, Dylan said that by the time they reached the area near Coal Creek Natural Area, Emily showed no response and her body had gone cold. He closed the trunk, stood by the roadside for nearly 2 minutes, then drove down a dirt path leading into the woods. This aligned completely with the distinctive glacial clay soil samples found. There, Dylan claimed he dragged Emily down a short slope not far from the trail, found a damp area, and dug with his hands and rocks he picked up nearby, a detail consistent with the absence of digging tools and the shallow depth of the makeshift grave created in panic. He described the location near the western auxiliary path of Coal Creek Trail, about 20 meters from the stream, behind a cluster of tall poplar trees. This was precise enough coordinates to deploy the forensics team. Based on the confession, the next morning, ESPD mobilized the cold case excavation team, combined with GPR equipment and geological mapping. In less than 3 hours, GPR detected an anomaly beneath the shallow soil in the area Dylan described. When excavated to about 40 centimeters, the forensics team found arm bones and remnants of decayed fabric consistent with the jacket Emily was wearing in the 2008 camera footage. The entire area was cordoned off, excavated over 2 days, recovering most of the skeleton along with some small items. A blue hair tie, fragments of backpack fabric, and a stainless steel earring. All were sent to the King County Forensics Lab for DNA testing. Bone samples matched 99.99% with Emily's mother's DNA sample, confirming the remains had been found after 14 years missing. At that point, with Dylan's confession, the body location, and the forensic evidence aligning with the behavioral model, the entire chain of proof was completed. SPD officially closed the victim search phase and transferred the full file to criminal prosecution. After Emily Vargas's remains were positively identified by DNA and Dylan Brooks's final confession fully matched the physical evidence, the case file was transferred to the King County Prosecuting Attorney's Office. There, the prosecution team comprehensively reviewed the legal elements from the initial act causing fatal injury to the chain of actions concealing the body and providing false statements over 14 years. Given the nature of the case, no evidence that Dylan intended to kill Emily beforehand, but clear direct violent behavior leading to fatal injury, followed by abandoning the victim without seeking aid. The prosecution decided to charge Dylan with manslaughter in the first degree, arguing that he recklessly caused the death of another person and tampering with physical evidence for actively concealing the body, staging the scene, and obstructing the investigation. The indictment stated clearly, the act of pushing her down, resulting in a severe head impact, combined with failing to call for emergency help and removing the victim from Seattle in critical condition, constituted grossly reckless conduct fitting the manslaughter 1 framework. The prosecution also considered that Dylan never came forward in 14 years, deliberately withheld information, eliminated any chance to save the victim's life, and prevented the family from holding a burial. During pre-trial preparations, Dylan's defense attorney attempted to argue it was purely an accident, that Dylan panicked and did not fully comprehend the consequences, and that the injury might not have been immediately fatal. However, King County Forensics rebutted this with impact injury analysis based on collision modeling and fall height simulation, showing that striking the brick wall edge could readily cause severe traumatic brain injury, requiring immediate emergency care. The forensics team also demonstrated that if Dylan had called 911 within minutes of the incident, Emily had a realistic chance of survival. Placing her in the trunk and driving out of the city for over 30 minutes eliminated that chance. The trial at King County Superior Court lasted 8 days. The prosecution presented the full chain of evidence: AI-enhanced camera footage, precise timeline, Cougar Mountain soil samples, trunk abrasion marks, Riley Carver's testimony about the initial argument, the final confession, and skeletal analysis results. The jury paid particular attention to the tight alignment between the behavioral model and what was found at Coal Creek, an overall match the 2008 file could never achieve. Dylan was allowed to give a final statement in which he apologized to Emily's family, but still described the incident as an uncontrolled accident, which the prosecution characterized as continued evasion of responsibility. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned a verdict. Dylan Brooks, guilty of manslaughter in the first degree and tampering with physical evidence. The judge sentenced 216 months for manslaughter 1 and 24 months for tampering, totaling 20 years imprisonment, with no significant sentence reduction possible due to the prolonged concealment factor, only eligible for supervised release consideration after serving at least 85% of the time under Washington state law. In parallel with Dylan's prosecution, Maya Elliott was charged with filing a false report and obstruction of a public officer for providing false statements in 2008 to cover for Dylan's actions. Although not directly involved in Emily's death, Maya deliberately reinforced the false alibi, delayed the investigation, and caused the case to go cold. Maya pleaded guilty under a plea agreement and was sentenced to 12 months probation, 200 hours of community service, and mandatory participation in a legal awareness and rehabilitation program. When the judge declared the trial proceedings concluded, SPD and the prosecuting attorney's office officially closed the Emily Vargas file at the end of 2022, noting the case was resolved through a combination of modern investigative technology, forensic analysis, and re-evaluation of old statements. After 14 years since Emily disappeared, the justice system finally established the truth. bringing closure to one of the longest and most complex missing persons cases in Rainier Valley history. Looking back on the entire investigation into Emily Vargas's disappearance, readers in the United States today can clearly see an important lesson. Time never erases the truth, but it is human hesitation, fear, or deliberate concealment that delays justice. Emily's case illustrates a very familiar reality in American society. Many missing persons cases are initially underevaluated, especially when the victim is a young adult. SPD's failure in 2008 to promptly detect anomalies, combined with Maya's false statements, pushed the entire system into a dead end for 14 years. From this, the first lesson for every individual is honesty in reporting protects not only oneself, but also an entire life. Maya's silence, though not directly causing the death, prevented the family from finding Emily and left an entire community in prolonged anxiety. This reflects the reality in America, where many investigations stall simply because witnesses don't want the hassle, want to protect a friend, or think the detail they know is unimportant. Emily's case proves the opposite. One small detail can change the entire outcome. The second lesson is the importance of technology in modern justice. AI-enhanced imaging, soil analysis under vehicles, and route modeling were tools unavailable in 2008, but became key by 2022. This reminds us that in an America increasingly reliant on data and technology, every action leaves traces, and those traces can bring justice back, even if late. Finally, the deepest lesson comes from Dylan's own mistake. A single impulsive act, an uncontrolled emotion, can destroy 2 lives and wound dozens more around them. In a society like the United States, where mental pressure, expectations, and personal conflicts grow ever larger, learning to control emotions, seek help, and resolve conflicts safely is an essential life skill. The Emily Vargas case is not just a story of justice found, but a costly reminder that truth, accountability, and courage must come first, even in humanity's most difficult moments. Thank you for following this story full of loss, but also full of value about truth and justice to the end. If you found it meaningful, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other cases solved after years in the shadows. See you in the next video, where we continue to explore stories that remind us no truth can be buried forever.